Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You're listening to the Locked On Broncos Podcast, hosted by Cody Roark, your daily Broncos podcast.
As we continue to navigate through the offseason, we discuss which Denver Broncos player will be the breakout player of the year for the team in 2021. Myself and Broncos Country, we share our response and we engage in discussion with it as well. On today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked On NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, senior NFL analyst and director of video content at Pro Football Network and Broncos analyst for the Locked On NFL Network. You can follow me on social media on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Broncos. Make sure you like us on Facebook and make sure that you are following or subscribed on your favorite audio podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or the Odyssey app. Not to mention, hit that subscribe button here on the YouTube channel, Locked On Broncos. We're close till 4K. You get the show here every single day in video format. So Broncos Country, very happy to be with you here on this beautiful Tuesday all across Broncos Country. The offseason, it's the slow part of the year here from June through July. Once we get to training camp, everything is full steam ahead. But from now, usually up until training camp, is one of the slowest times of the entire NFL offseason. We're going to have different conversations, different topics that we're going to go through on Twitter, here on YouTube, and social media in general to get you, the fans and the listeners of the show, involved here. So I appreciate all of your contributions. So we're going to start things off here today by talking about who maybe the breakout player of the year candidates could be for the Broncos. I'm going to share my thoughts and my reasoning using statistics, and then we're going to use Broncos fans' suggestions. I mean, there was common consensus among several players. We'll get to that. Then we'll get into our Broncos Classifieds before we close out today's episode of the show. So starting things off here, in terms of breakout player of the year candidates, my first selection, I went offense and defense. My first selection was Jeudy. And the reason I say that is I think Jeudy, despite the fact that he had probably in his own mind and in the mind of many people as well, he didn't have the season his rookie year that he had hoped for. But I don't think any player in the NFL outside of those who really had a lot of success did. The comparison that people are making right now is, well, Justin Jefferson's a better wide receiver. I think Justin Jefferson was probably in a better situation. You give Jeudy Kirk Cousins to throw him the ball, maybe his rookie year. Maybe Jeudy puts up the same amount of numbers that Justin Jefferson did. I mean, it's all just debate. It's all hearsay back and forth right now. I know my man Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings, he and I would probably debate this. But, for Jeudy, when we look at how he performed, maybe the drops were probably the biggest issue for him. But outside of that, he was a fun player to watch. He's a special player, and you can see the talent that he has. So in 2020, he had 52 catches. 52 catches on the year, despite the fact that he rotated through 4 different quarterbacks. That right there is amazing in and of itself. Out of his 52 receptions, 39 of them went for a first down. So he was one of those players that if you needed to stretch the field because of his route running ability, his ability to create separation, I mean, he does a really good job of getting defensive backs. If he sees that they're inside leverage, he's going to give an outside move to get them to turn their hips. He's going to cut back to the inside because he gets that separation, that leverage. All he needs is about a half an inch of separation, and he can do damage. The only issue sometimes, once he would create that separation, he'd be looking to get upfield before looking the ball in all the way. I think that'll change this year. That's an optimism thing that I think that Broncos fans have. But we talked about Noah Fant on yesterday's episode of the show in terms of his average depth of target. This is how far down the field he is when the ball is thrown to him. 13.5 yards is his average depth of target on the season last year. That's pretty dang good. He's one of those guys that you can stretch the middle of the field with. That's what the Broncos utilized him with. He had 5 broken tackles on the season, 10 drops, though. That is the concerning part. He absolutely has to clean that up. He's got to drop that down, in my opinion. When we talk about drops, too, there's some that can be factored into catchable or non-catchable. Sometimes if a pass is thrown behind you and you have to body adjust, it's tough to have the expectation that you as a wide receiver are expected to make that type of catch, even though that we see players do it. It doesn't always apply that way. So the drops were an evident thing. I guess that Los Angeles Chargers game was probably the most frustrating, I think, for Broncos fans when it was looking at Jeudy. But he met with the media afterwards. I mean, he took it like a champ. And And he came back and he bounced back the next week against the Raiders, a 92-yard touchdown. And you love to see that about Jerry Jeudy. Nobody on the Raiders could cover him, by the way. So there's that. And there were 6 interceptions thrown by the quarterback when targeting Jerry Jeudy. So that's probably a product of the fact that there was no Cortland Sutton. Tim Patrick was the other option there, and he had a very phenomenal year. But Jerry Jeudy, I mean, the pressure was on him last year to step up to be the number one guy. And obviously quarterbacks would force the ball to him because he is that shiny, flashy weapon. And, I expect to see more of it in 2020 in terms of the Broncos trying to go to him. So can they reduce the turnovers? Can they reduce the drops? I think that'll be a big determining factor as to whether or not he can break out this upcoming season. But I'm going to leave us here with a bold prediction. In 2021, I have a bold prediction. I believe that Jerry Jeudy will have one game next season where he has 200-plus yards receiving. You heard it here first on the podcast. If I'm right, someone buy me coffee. If I'm wrong, I'll buy everybody coffee. So that's going to be probably 1,000 people. But outside of that, Broncos country, I appreciate you. That's my offensive selection. My defensive selection, outside of the obvious, I've been a big fan and supporter of Dre'Mont Jones's work and his productivity. I'm going to go with Shelby Harris, though. For him, he secured the immediate long-term future on a 3-year deal. He is healthy. He's ready to go, and he's ready to contribute even more. When you look back at 2020, he only played 41% of the Broncos' defensive snaps. 41%. Yes, he missed 4 games due to COVID. He missed the last game of the regular season against the Las Vegas Raiders with a knee injury, and that obviously factors into it. But in those 11 games that Shelby played in 2020, he had 6 hurries, 8 quarterback knockdowns, and 17 total pressures. I mean, this is a guy consistently week in and week out that was fighting double teams. He was creating opportunities for Mike Purcell, for the inside linebackers, for the guys on the outside edge, Malik Reed, Bradley Chubb. A lot of that is because of Shelby Harris and his presence on the interior. Pro Football Focus, I believe, put something out, or one of the USA Today sites put something out there saying that in terms of interior defensive linemen, the Broncos don't have any in the top 10 defensive players on the interior D-line. Maybe Shelby Harris can change that narrative, but he's got to put together a full-on season this upcoming year. And if he does play a full season, I think his numbers are going to be massive. I think the contribution, especially with Vaughn back, with Bradley Chubb on the outside, Dre'Mont Jones being able more than likely to get the start on the other opposite side of him, defensive end, Mike Purcell returning. I think that there's going to be a special season in store for Shelby Harris and just for the Broncos defense in general. But Broncos country, coming up here in just a moment, we're going to share our fan responses, who they believe is going to be the breakout player of the year candidate for the organization, coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, folks, I have to tell you about the sponsors of today's episode of the show. That's our good friends over there, rockauto.com and betonline.ag. Starting things off with rockauto.com. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it is now impossible to stock all the parts that you need in a traditional chain storefront. So why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the counterman orders parts on his computer, choosing the only brand that his warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. And rockauto.com is a family-owned business that's been serving auto parts customers online for over 20 years. They have everything from engine control modules, brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Whether it's for your classic or your daily driver, you get everything that you need delivered directly to your doorstep in just a few easy clicks. And the rockauto.com catalog is unique and remarkably easy to navigate. I went on there when I needed something for my vehicle. I was able to go through and search based on my year, make, and model of my vehicle, and I was able to choose the brands, the specifications, and even the prices that I prefer. I got the best bed out there, and I didn't have to wait too long for it to be delivered to my doorstep. And not to mention, prices at rockauto.com are always reliably low, and they're the same for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. So why spend up to twice as much for the same parts elsewhere when you can go to rockauto.com? So go there right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck, right? Lockdown Broncos in there. How did you hear about us box? So that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts that your car will ever need. rockauto.com. And our good friends over there, betonline.ag. And BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your sports action. Baseball season is in full swing, and you can track all the action at BetOnline. You get all the latest news, odds, and info for all your sporting needs, including MLB, NBA, NHL, and all of your UFC and MMA action. So before the next pitch, head over to BetOnline on your laptop or mobile device and check out all the great sporting news, sign-up bonuses, and contest information. Don't sit on the sidelines anymore, as this is your chance to get into the game as teams prep for their runs to the playoffs. And head to the website, use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Jumping into our conversation on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. Happy Tuesday, Broncos country. I shared the two players, offense and defense, that I felt like were breakout player candidates for 2021. Broncos fans, a lot of Broncos fans, might I add, sent me a bunch of responses on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL with their responses. And the common consensus was amongst 4 players there, and we're going to get into that too. Starting things off here, Dre'Mont Jones. I'm glad I didn't choose him because a lot of the fans did as well. And when you look at Dre'Mont Jones, he is in a position, and I've talked about it here on the podcast a couple weeks ago. We had a feature on him where he could be the next big breakout player on the Broncos defense, the impact player. And I really think that rings true, especially as we talk about projecting a little bit too early here in the offseason, maybe how players can step up and be breakout players this upcoming season. Dre'Mont Jones, when you look at his 2020 production, he had 6 hurries, 3 quarterback knockdowns in 13 games, not to mention 6.5 sacks in 13 games, folks, and he had 16 total pressures. He is a strong impact player that can play inside on a 4-eye inside the tackle, inside the shoulder of the tackle. He could play a 3 technique on the outside shoulder of the guard. He could do a variety of different things, whether it be stunt on the inside to where he can stunt to the A gap, and then the defensive tackle or the other defensive lineman is going to wrap out, depends on what package the Broncos are in. But Dre'Mont Jones is a guy that with his size and with his power, he's got such strength on his upper body, and he uses his leverage to drive with his feet. He creates penetration in the back pocket of the line of scrimmage and into the quarterback's ability to stand in a clean pocket. Quarterbacks don't have too much time when Dre'Mont Jones is in there because he's finding ways to get pressure. He was able to pressure Patrick Mahomes consistently in both the Sunday Night Football matchup and in that blowout game in the snow where the Broncos defense wasn't even at fault for the performance. It was really on the offense in that game. The Broncos defense did their job. They sacked Patrick Mahomes. They held him to 0 for 8 on 3rd down. What more could you ask for? And Dre'Mont Jones was a big player in terms of the outcome of that. So now he's going to have a more prominent role at the departure of DeMarcus Walker, no Jarrell Casey. Dre'Mont Jones is now the favorite to be penciled in as the starter for the Broncos, opposite of Shelby Harris, and then right next to Mike Purcell. And obviously when you have guys like Malik Reed and Bradley Chubb on the outside to you, it's going to make your job even easier. Vic Fangio really likes Dre'Mont Jones, and Dre'Mont Jones is in a big position this year to really have a productive season and to be an impact player for the Broncos defense. And so Broncos fans, they selected Dre'Mont Jones as their impact player, their breakout player of the year candidate. Other fans, they selected Patrick Surtain, the Broncos' first-round draft selection, the rookie. And, one thing that we can attest this to is looking back at his time at Alabama, teams often shied away from targeting him because he plays tightly contested coverage. He blankets players. Yes, when you look at his college statistics, he only had 4 interceptions in his 3 seasons at Alabama, but he played as a true freshman. I mean, this is a guy that absolutely caught the attention of Nick Saban and came in right away, made an impact, and then he stayed on the field. He became one of Saban's most reliable players, and we don't hear Nick Saban throw too much praise out about players, but he had a lot to say about Patrick Surtain, and look, that's going to be the fun thing, too. When you look at 4 interceptions, it doesn't paint the bigger picture. We talk about passes, defense. We talk about look-away. Sometimes there's quarterbacks that will get the ball, they'll snap it, they'll look his way, they'll see that the receiver is tightly covered, and then they're going to go to the next read, the next progression. There were often at times many teams, they tried to look that way, and if they threw it, he either broke it up, or he had an interception, or he rallied and tackled quickly on a short completion. Often at times he caused a lot of incompletions as well. So Patrick Surtain, I think he's going to be tested this upcoming season. Obviously, being a rookie, anytime you're out there on the field and you're lined up, any experienced offensive coordinator, it doesn't matter that Patrick Surtain was a stud cornerback at the collegiate level. They're going to be looking at him and they'll say, hey, he's a rookie. Let's test him, because the NFL game is much different. It's faster and your room for error is much smaller. So I think that for the Broncos, for Patrick Surtain, it's the perfect opportunity to be able to be thrown into the fire because you have a great supporting cast around you. Now, I would be a little bit more concerned if Patrick Surtain was the only stud in the Broncos secondary, but you have Justin Simmons behind him, Kareem Jackson behind him, and then on the opposite side, you have guys like Kyle Fuller, Ronald Darby, Bryce Callahan. You have supporting cast around you. Will we see a point, too, because we've seen it with Vic Fangio. Sometimes he benches a cornerback if they're struggling, and he gives them time to earn that opportunity to get back in the lineup. I don't know if we're going to get to that point with Patrick Surtain, but I do want to let Broncos fans know, yes, he is a first-round talent. Yes, he's going to experience times throughout his NFL career, maybe even in his rookie season, where he's going to get burned on a play. That doesn't mean that he's a bust. It just means that he's got an opportunity to learn, but he's got such a cerebral mindset. Champ Bailey's very outspoken about what he believes about Patrick Surtain, and I think that Broncos fans should invest in what Champ Bailey has to say regarding that, because Champ Bailey, he knows a thing or two about corner because he's played it. So yes, Patrick Surtain is one of those players as well And the other player too, Drew Lock and Noah Fant, they got some consideration, but Cortland Sutton was a name that came up to me this upcoming season, especially in one of the responses that I really look forward to seeing how he translates coming off of an ACL injury, because there's always that pressure, right? He may get off to a slow start, but based on seeing how he's running right now in OTAs and what he's going to be doing in camp, I don't think he's going to be limited. I think he's going to be ready to go for that week 1 matchup against the New York Giants. And that secondary that they have, it's going to provide a little bit of a test for Cortland coming off, especially first game injury. Will we see him in the preseason? Probably not. I mean, I wouldn't do it personally. If I'm a coach, I'm saying, hey, I'm not going to put him out there in a preseason game because it's meaningless and you don't want something to go wrong. Preseason is always one of the scary areas where you play your veteran players. And if they get hurt, then you throw your hands up in the air and say, why do we even do this? That's a big gripe why players don't even want preseason to be around, but it is necessary for the younger guys. But for Cortland Sutton last year, he only played in 1 game for Denver. I think a lot of people forget he didn't play against Tennessee. I wonder how the outcome of that game could have went if, in fact, Cortland did play. But in 1 game, he had 6 targets. This was against the Steelers. 6 targets. Pretty good secondary, by the way, in Pittsburgh. 3 catches on 6 targets, 66 yards. His average depth of target, right? The distance that he was downfield when the ball was thrown to him was 17.7 yards through the air. So it is evident as day that still Cortland Sutton is viewed as a deep ball threat here. Now, I do want to say, too, that despite that, when you look at 2019, his average depth of target, because this is a fuller sample size in 2019 and also in 2018, it probably makes a little bit more sense. This was 1 game in 2020 where he had 17.7 yards average depth of target. In 2019, it was 11.6 yards. So he was still that deep ball guy for the Broncos. He did evolve in his route running. And then in 2018 with Case Keenum, it was 14 yards average depth of target. So for him, he's not just a one-trick pony, right? And you get the SMU expression there. He does not want to be viewed as a one-trick pony, just as the guy that's going to go up and get those 50-50 balls. He is really working on evolving as a route runner on the short to the intermediate stuff, and he's working with Jeudy. He said last week when we met with him in a media press conference that he is learning things, and he's stealing things from guys like KJ Hamler, Jeudy, and they're using stuff that he's doing as well. So Cortland Sutton, he has an opportunity this year. I mean, he could be the deep ball threat, the lone deep ball threat, if he wanted to be. But he doesn't want to do that. He wants to contribute on the deep balls, but he also wants to open things up across the middle of the field and also in the short to intermediate passing game where he believes he could help the Broncos. And that's going to open things up for guys like Jeudy, Tim Patrick, and even Noah Fant. So I think that we have to consider all these things when we look at where Cortland Sutton is at in his return from ACL surgery. But Broncos Country, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your responses on who you believe the Broncos breakout player of the year candidate will be in 2021. But coming up here in just a moment, we're going to get into our Broncos Classifieds talk, kind of closing out on some Broncos news and notes, what to expect this week as the team is back for OTAs leading up to next week where we have mandatory minicamp, and then the players are going to have some time off, and then it is training camp, folks, and that means that the season is there, preseason, and then bam, the regular season. Football is almost back. But before we do that, folks, I have to tell you about the other sponsor of today's episode of the show. That is our good friends over there at Built Bar. Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar out there on the market. You know me personally. My favorite is peanut butter brownie. The thing I love about Built Bar the most, it tastes legitimately like a candy bar because the bars, they are covered in 100% chocolate. Not to mention, they are soft and easy to chew. Whether you just take them out of the wrapper or if you put them in the fridge or the freezer for about an hour, you take a bite in a Built Bar, you're going to see why people are raving about the best tasting protein bar on the market today. And they have 9 delicious flavors, including the occasional limited time flavor. They have cherry, coconut almond, raspberry, mint brownie, peanut butter brownie, double chocolate, and salted caramel. So there is a flavor for everybody, folks. And I want you to try Built Bar today. Not only are Built Bars very good and they taste like a candy bar, they're also very healthy for you as well. The bars, they're only 70 grams of protein, only 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. So you get the luxury of having something that makes you feel good. I use it before I work out or after a workout, especially if I don't eat breakfast or lunch throughout the day. Built Bar gets me through my day, and I wanted to get you through yours as well. Indulge in a delicious treat today by going to BuiltBar.com using promo code LOCKED15, and you will get 15% off your next order when you use promo code LOCKED15 at BuiltBar.com. 15% off your order, folks. Broncos Country, you got to take advantage of it. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. All right, Broncos Country, as we get into the fourth quarter action of today's episode of the show, just a reminder to check out the other Colorado sports podcasts here on the Locked On NFL Network. The Avalanche, they went up 1-0 against the Las Vegas Knights, and Chris Maselli has you covered with the day-to-day drive on the ice with your Colorado Avalanche. And not to mention Nuggets basketball, they're hosting a playoff game here at Ball Arena tonight against the Portland Trail Blazers. The series is tied 2-2. But the Nuggets, they can go up 3-2 and have a chance to close it out in Portland. It would be oh so sweet if they did that. And Adam Mares and Matt Moore of Locked On Nuggets bring you all the pick and roll action on your Denver Nuggets. If you're a Colorado sports fan, we have coverage of every team that you love and root for on Sundays, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, every single day of the week here at the Locked On Podcast Network. So with that said, let's continue on with today's episode of the show. Broncos Country, getting into our Broncos Classifieds, our news and notes. The Broncos, they are back on the practice field here today at the UC Health Training Center as OTAs continue. They're back on the field today, tomorrow, and then Friday. We're also going to hear from Vic Fangio a little bit later today. We'll react on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos, also some select players for media availability. We'll react to what they had to say, break down the biggest storylines, and more. But 7-on-7 work's going to continue between the offenses and the defenses, and not to mention positional work. Will we see some new players return to the fold this week? Could we see Kyle Fuller make an appearance at the team facility? All eyes are on who's attending OTAs, but as we know, it is voluntary at this point. But next week is when things get real. It is mandatory minicamp, and that all begins next week. And we're going to have you covered here on the Locked On Broncos podcast for all the news, notes, and action in Dove Valley. But outside of that, there's a couple other talking points on today's classifieds. According to Pro Football Focus, Shelby Harris, he leads the NFL in batted passes since 2017 with 21. Hashtag best hands in the league, as Shelby posted on social media. And the really cool thing about Shelby Harris, I don't think a lot of people factor in, before Shelby Harris, who are the defensive linemen that were consistently getting their hands up and batting passes down at the line of scrimmage? Well, for the Broncos fans will remember, it was Malik Jackson, but I don't think that Malik Jackson did it at the rate that we see Shelby Harris do it. And J.J. Watt, I mean, he had the nickname J.J. Swat at some point. Shelby Harris has been the key guy on the Broncos' interior defensive line, playing at the defensive end, playing sometimes in a 3, a 4-eye, a 1-tech, a 2-eye. He gets his hand up, and he knows how to time it perfectly. So Shelby Harris, those big hands coming in clutch. And that's why George Payton and the Denver Broncos, they decided to pay him a little bit of that money. So obviously a great feat there for Shelby Harris. But there was also a conversation, too, according to Pro Football Focus, about the edge depth in the National Football League. Which duo is the best or will be primed for the best season from an edge rushing duo standpoint? Bradley Chubb's on there. Von Miller's on there. Outside of that, you have the Arizona Cardinals, Chandler Jones, and you have J.J. Watt. You have the Washington football team with Chase Young and Montez Sweat. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Shaq Barrett and JPP. Cleveland Browns, they got Myles Garrett and now Jadeveon Clowney added to the mix. That's going to be a lethal tandem. And then you have the New Orleans Saints, Cam Jordan and Marcus Davenport. I think that when you look at all these players, I mean, I don't know who you could say is the best at this point in time. I mean, if we're going off of last year, you probably have to go with Shaq Barrett and JPP. And Chase Young and Montez Sweat, they get a little bit of consideration there. Chandler Jones was playing really well before he had a season-ending injury. And J.J. Watt, I mean, he's always been the guy that's been inconsistent in terms of being able to play a full season. Who knows what we're going to get from that duo there? But the potential is there. The last time that Bradley Chubb and Von Miller were both healthy for an entire season together, they combined for 26.5 sacks. That right there, if you're basing it off of that, Denver's got the favorable duo right there. However, these are all really damn good players. You know, for me, I'm really intrigued to see about Shaq Barrett and JPP. Can they replicate that success this upcoming season? I think personnel-wise in the back end of that secondary, the linebacker position, obviously with Devin White, Levante David, they're still very talented. It makes their job even easier. And Vita Vea being healthy is going to help Shaq Barrett and JPP get more one-on-one matchups because he does command some attention on the interior, especially when you consider the blitz packages with the inside backers that Tampa Bay really likes to run. Denver found out about that. They gave up 9 sacks against Tampa Bay in that Week 3 matchup last year. But Myles Garrett, Jadeveon Clowney, Myles Garrett's a beast. I mean, he is a phenomenal football player. I'm a little skeptical about Jadeveon Clowney considering his injury history, and he's never really had that type of season where he's going to be a game-changing player as an edge rusher, as a guy who's getting to the quarterback. He's strong, he's disciplined, but he's battled those injury concerns, and I think that's going to hold him back, and that's going to limit him a little bit. Cam Jordan, Marcus Davenport, the New Orleans Saints, it's going to be a big season for them because the thing that I think most people are looking at with New Orleans, what is life going to look like for that franchise after Drew Brees? The Broncos, they're going through a 5-year stretch right now. How do you replace a Hall of Famer in Peyton Manning? How do the Saints replace a Hall of Famer in Drew Brees? Like, these guys defensively, they might have some success, but what about the offense? So well, we'll see how things go there. But Broncos Country, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode, Locked On Broncos, here on your favorite podcast provider. That will do it for today's episode of the show. We recapped Broncos fans, breakout player of the year for 2021, people that they believed were going to have a big season. I shared my thoughts. We went through our Broncos Classifieds, and we did it all here on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and the Odyssey app, not to mention Locked On Broncos every single day here on the YouTube channel. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, like the video, comment, engage with me. I love interacting with everybody in the comment section on YouTube and also on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL. If there's anything I can ever do for you, if you want to talk Broncos football with me one-on-one, you want to have a film session one-on-one, we'll pull up the tape. Let me know. We'll set it up. I'd love to be able to do that for you, Broncos Country. But thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of the show. We're going to hear from Vic Fangio on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos. Also, some select players who meet with the media as the Broncos, they continue OTAs here today at the UCL Training Center in Inglewood, Colorado.